Good to be with you, everybody. Normally when I talk to people about anything related to church, I start by doing a lot of listening because people bring a lot of their own background to the conversation, sometimes wonderful things, sometimes a bit of baggage. So it's knowing I'm going into this without having the opportunity to have heard more than the odd 5-minute thing from some of you. So yeah, I had a physics background. Just focusing on particles didn't quite do it for me. I wanted more people in my life. I lived and worked in a pub in England for a couple of years. And then I lived and worked at an improv dance retreat center for 5 years, a place called Earth Dance. A lot of contact improv. People would come through and teach me things like Qigong and body-mind centering. Anyway, it turned out to be a very spiritual place. And my job ended up being holding the space for new groups, welcoming them, helping them feel safe, open their hearts, have an amazing time together. And when I was doing that, a friend suggested to me, have you considered being a minister? And I really hadn't. I had been raised Unitarian, which is, I like to think of it as a church for atheists. You don't have to be an atheist to be Unitarians, but a lot are. But I took her advice and I looked at a book called 5 Purposes of Church, and I had to translate it because it was written for a Christian audience. But the 5 purposes were, in my translation, personal growth, community, centering, helping people, and spreading the word. And I thought, wow, I do 4 of those 5 things already. I don't integrate them at all. They're all over the place. Wouldn't it be cool to integrate them, do them all together? So I started thinking about divinity school. Unfortunately, most Unitarians don't have their own divinity school that's accessible. So we end up going to a Christian school, which is very much focused on the Christian story, the larger Christian story. So it gave me a lot of time to consider what is the larger story for me. And for me, the larger story starts with the Big Bang, like this awesome mystery. Where did the energy of the Big Bang come from? Like, I have no idea. What a mystery. Stars form, planets form, life appears. Where did life come from? What an awesome mystery. I have no idea. Like consciousness, amazing. And then love shows up on planet Earth. Amazing. How did that happen? Blows me away. So I feel like this larger story we're a part of, for me, is the story of the universe coming alive and learning how to love. I normally mostly tell that story at funerals. In my denomination, people stopped using the word funeral and said, let's just say the words celebration of life. And it often, would be a sweet experiencing, remembering the person who you had just lost. But I felt like something was missing to me. And in divinity school, I learned a couple of things to add to the experience to make it feel much richer, like we were doing in church. Well, thanks, David, for that message. That's really cool. I went to Emmanuel College. So when I do funerals now, I start by telling the person's story so that they are never forgotten. But then I weave it into the larger story of the universe. So often the people are, did their life be part of the story of the universe coming to love, learning how to love itself? That is often a very powerful experience. And then the third part of the funeral is changing our relationship with the person. We will never have them in our lives again in that way, but we will still always have them in our hearts as we move forward in a new way. And I just find adding those 2 elements makes that ritual much more meaningful and helps people move forward in life. So why do church if you're an atheist? I feel like there's just a lot of wisdom there. If you just have a couple of things added to your checklist of what to do in rituals, it can make things much more powerful. I meant to start my clock, Julianne, and I forgot to. So could you give me like a minute or 30 seconds warning?
I also didn't take a look at the time when you started, but I've really found it interesting to hear about like what has drawn you to it and what your experience has been in the Unitarian ministry. But I'll just be quiet so that you can continue. Maybe like a couple, like 2 more minutes or so.
Yeah, that's fine. I feel like some of the big questions we address in church, so these, like, for me, are the big questions besides the great mysteries I've already mentioned. What is good? Like, what is goodness? I'm trying to live a good life. What does that look like? What am I aiming for? Who are we? Like, we're children of evolution with psychological shadow and maybe some predator drives and selfish genes. But in a way, for me, we're also children of God. For me, I use God to mean all that is good. Like, I don't know where I came from. I don't feel like I was born from God, but I feel like I've allowed myself to be adopted by God. And I've joined the family of love, hopefully. And I try to live up to that every day. So who are we? Children of God, but we're also children of evolution. It's really complicated. And denying our shadow makes things more complicated. Other big questions: how do we relate to each other? How do we do community? How do we do church? Seeing behind the scenes of the Unitarians, it's way more complicated and shadowy than I thought growing up. I just thought it was a pep rally for social justice. Another big question: well, what happens when we die? For some people, that's a big question. For other people, they just assume they have the answer and don't dwell on it. How do we change? How do we change? For some people, they have that conversation with their therapist or with their best friends or with their life coach. I like having that conversation as well in church. Another big question: how do we know? A lot of Unitarians were kind of rich, privileged, arrogant people, and these days we're like, how do we know? We better listen to a lot of voices we haven't been listening to. So that's something I've been trying to do a lot more of. That's why I like to start with listening. And the last big question, thinking that presentation of the king's finances and the US political system, the big question of, is this a universe where love can win? I don't know. I hope so. I'm going to treat it like it is and give it my all. And I'll just close by saying, a lot of people are experimenting, like they've abandoned the tradition of their parents or ancestors. They're experimenting. For me, doing church and community is being part of an accountable system where we can do these experiments together and add to our checklist that adds richness to our rituals.